All right, I'm Todd Schlafer. Thanks everyone for coming. This time of year, like when I was thinking about what to do a talk on, right about, not quite, so right now we're a little early, but coming up within the next few weeks, maybe the next month, is like Ponderosa pines will start dropping their third year needles. And so now is a really good time to work on them. So Ponderosas are, and like, one of the things I like about Ponderosa, even though like they have long needles, so that's a challenge, but that's also like this little game of cat and mouse that you play with Ponderosas and trying to get like a good needle size. And so they're a single flush long needle pine. So like a little background on them, when I have a Ponderosa pine, and maybe like I design it first, so then the first couple years, I fertilize it really hard and I water it really well. So I'll get longer needles, but you'll start to get back buds, and then getting the back buds and then that needle mass developed is what will actually get you over time shorter needles. And so if you come in like with some pines, like let's say black pines, right? You cut the candles, or Scots pines, maybe you pinch them. If you pinch the buds on Ponderosa pines, then your needles will get really long, because what happens is from the spring when they start growing until they start shedding their third year needles, so that's what's going to happen, is their needles will start turning colors. The needles grow that entire time, right? So if you mess with them and you take off too much foliage, the tree's like, oh, I have less foliage, I'm going to put on more needle length to compensate for that. Okay, so a lot of times with Ponderosas, you don't touch them all year long, and then in the fall, once they start dropping third year needles, that's when you can do work on them. So that's kind of like my process in thinking what would be a good topic to talk about this time of year, and so that's why I picked Ponderosas. So this tree I designed, it might have been 3 or 4 years ago, and last year I put it into this container, right? So then last year I didn't touch the tree, I just let it grow. And then this year, as I was looking at this tree, and I'd started to work on some of my other Ponderosas back here because I'm just really in love with them, I started noticing like, okay, so we have good back buds, like here's a good bud here, here's some back budding here. There is a bud right here. So on this branch, so when I first designed this tree...
Tom, let's get in close, let me show you.
Okay.
You want to show some of that, buddy?
So right here, like so this is probably grown for 2 years. There's a bud down here, there's a bud right there, there's a bud right there. So this is getting a lot of good back budding on, especially like this lowest branch, and then up here as you start looking, right? There's budding up in here. So when I got to that point, it's like, okay, this could be a good time to like maybe start refining it a little more. And so this tree I'd fertilized all year long. So after I do this work, I'll still fertilize until the end of this year, but then next year I won't fertilize this until the fall. Okay, so that's one thing with Ponderosas that are a little different, or at least single flush long needle pines, is that you don't fertilize them in the spring, right? So some of our other species, like the elongating species like firs and stuff like that, you can work them early before they push, and then you can kind of direct that energy. Whereas with Ponderosas, if you work them in the late winter, early spring before they start growing, you're just going to get really long needles. So if anyone has questions about any of this, please speak up, just to make sure that I'm explaining myself well. So this was designed, I fed this really hard, and so now as this starts to drop its older needles, now is a good time to work it. And so like what I've started to do with my other Ponderosas, and what I'll do with this, is I'll come in and we'll start by seeing where the buds are, okay? And so on this lowest branch here, there's some buds in different places. And so all I'm doing is I'm coming in and I'm going to start cleaning out the area. See, there's a bud right here. there's a bud right here, and there's a bud right here that's growing down. Okay, and so I'm going to clean off some of these needles, clean off the space around those buds, and then I'll go in and I'll rewire this. Okay, and so too, like this is growing down, but that's okay. You know, even if you have buds, see it's right here. Even if you have buds growing down or buds growing up, it's okay. Just because they don't emerge from the sides doesn't mean we get rid of them. It just means, because this now we can just wire off to the side and bring it up, okay? So here, we'll start cleaning this. And here, I'm going to take the bottom growing needles off. And so I'm not going to take off all of the second year needles either. Like last year, we have this year, we have last year. So all I'm going to do is take off the third needles. I'll take off some of last year needles that are growing down, but I'm not going to take all of them off, okay? And so then here, if we look, like I've cleaned this out, and we have this bud here, we have this bud here growing down, and we have this here, but as you can see, my structural wire ended here. And then I didn't have any other wire coming down, so I can't do anything with that. So instead of cutting this off, then what I do, and we'll get a piece of pen because that's fairly big. So I'll cut that off, and if we look at this, like we have a little gap right here, and all in here we don't have gaps. So I'm just going to come take that wire, cut it at a little angle, and then I'm going to splice this into right there. Okay, splice this in, and now this will be the extension of my structural wire that'll run down here. Okay, so then when we get here, we're going to need to wire this. We'll need to wire that. So I'm just kind of trying to think ahead. How am I going to do this? So if we come here, we'll just clean off some more of these needles. Here. And so now, by splicing in that piece of wire, we have control, right? So now we'll have to wire these into place, which we'll do. And here we'll perk those tips up. And then when you're looking at this right here, we have these needles growing down. So let's clean this up just a little further. But then we can take this wire and kind of push it in there, perk those up, and then any of these needles you can remove too. So depending on like how many of those needles are, like sometimes, like most of the needles on here are kind of curved a little odd and they just look off. I won't pull all of them because you won't have anything left, right? So part of that, like this year, so we'll still have maybe some longer needles, maybe some are a little curved, but then next year, when those new needles come in, those could be a lot straighter, partially, I think, because like the needles have more room to grow, and then you can watch your watering, because I've noticed too, when you water really heavily, they sometimes grow in a little bit odd formation, so.
So we just had one request to try to slow down your hands just a touch. I think the video is just a little herky-jerky and people want to see what you're doing.
Oh, all right.
So.
All right. So here, I'm going to wire this. And then we want to get this bud right here. And so let's bring this bud up on this side because it's emerging. See this? It's emerging on, when you look at the tree, the right side. So we're going to keep that bud on the right side of this branch. Then we have this little bud back here, so I'm just going to pluck right here. So this will grow, and when that grows, we can pull that into here. So this, when I first designed this tree, this was just one bud, right? And so now we have three, and as this grows, we can fill this in. So this is a nice, a rounded bud. And so too, with Ponderosas, because the foliage is so big, like even if we had like 4 or 5 buds in here and they were all setting like this, it would be so congested. And so a lot of times with Ponderosas, you just have to take one of those like longer branches and stick it where you want it, and then you'll get back budding on that, So it's like this right here, this branch right here, it had 1 bud. Now there's 3 on it. But it's like this simulates a whole pad, and it's one branch, whereas with some other pines, you have more than 1 bud in there, and that makes up your pad. With Ponderosas, because the foliage is larger, you kind of have to use that whole foliage pad to kind of simulate the foliage mass to kind of simulate a pad. So yeah, and so with this tree, like right here, we got Deadwood. Like this is kind of interesting. And so I'm going to just take this and I just kind of want to frame this part in. So we'll frame that in with that, and then here, we'll move up to here. And so a lot of this, when you're doing like initial styling, sometimes I'll leave like the end of my wire just a little longer than I normally would, because I know that in like a couple years I'll need I'll need a little extra length of wire to kind of tie in maybe to a bud that I've gotten to wire in. Where this is like right here, this is a little short, so I'm gonna have to splice in again. So we'll take off bottom needles. Any questions on any of this? I don't
think we have anything on the chat. We're unfortunately not able to hear them sort of shouting out questions. So if you guys have questions, are you able to put them in the chat real quick?
Or maybe no one has them. I just want to make sure I'm explaining this correctly or well. Okay.
I don't think we have anything right now, Tom.
All right. Then I'm just...
we got something from Carrie. What do you use for feeding? I think it's a fertilization question.
Yeah, so for this tree, this gets BioGold. This gets all BioGold because it's like a tree that's in a container. I also have Dr. Earth Life, which I use. and there's a couple Dr. Earth Lifes. So there's Dr. Earth, there's an older formula and a newer formula. And so I was using the older formula before, and that older formula was, it's fine. Had, what was it? Like bat guano as a base, where this is more like alfalfa based. So, so this is, regardless, I use all organics. For anything that I use, it's all organic.
So on the top of your fertilization, you started to fertilize this tree this month?
April.
April.
So this tree,
because it's in development.
It's in development,
Gotcha.
and I wanted to get more budding on it. Yeah. So I started fertilizing it maybe May. Yeah. Like after we got that freeze, and then once I was looking, it's like, okay, we're clear. Maybe end of April, beginning of May, I started fertilizing this, and I've had, this is the third application of fertilizer on it. So I've been feeding it every month and a half or so, 6 weeks.
But for a refined tree, you wouldn't start fertilizing until about now?
So for a tree
next month, what do you think?
That's refined. For Ponderosa, I wouldn't feed it until it started dropping third year needles. Like here, once you start looking, and then the older needles, like a lot of times you panic because it's like, oh my God, the needles are turning yellow. But it's like, well, look at them. Are they this year's? Or are they last year's? Or are they the third year? And it's like, oh, they're the third year. It's like, well, that's exactly what the tree is supposed to do. So once they start dropping the third year needles, that's on a refined Ponderosa. That's when I would fertilize.
So we got one more question. Looks like Torg is saying, to some extent, this tree is in refinement, but the needles are still very long. Do you want to continue to treat it as a tree in development to increase foliage mass? I think.
So next year, that's a good question, because actually once I'm done, like with this piece of work, that'll kind of give me a better gauge of what. So, but my guess is, because even on this branch here, here we have 3 buds. Here we have 3 buds. On a lot of these where there was just one, we're getting back budding. So my guess is next year I will approach this tree as a tree that's more in refinement. So I won't fertilize it in the spring, and I'll fertilize it in the fall. But I don't know, we may get through this, and so there will still be so that's a good question. There will still be parts of this tree that are in development. So it's like, then how do you, what's your approach on that? Do you fertilize everything? Is it like maybe there's a branch in here that's in development, but do you use it? Because there's, it's like you kind of have to look at that and figure that out. So
that transition.
Yeah.
So when you approach a tree like this that you've styled already, you've set the primary structure, do you sort of come at it with fresh eyes, and are you intent on making big moves? Are you just focused on laying out secondaries? I mean, what is your mindset sort of when you come back to something like this?
Yep, so every time when I look at something new or something like this, when I was looking at this like right before we started and like over this whole year, it's like, okay, are there places that need improvement? Are there branches that can move? Is there things that need to be sucked in? Are there branches that can be pulled out? So every time, you don't just go in it blind and just, it's like, oh, I'll just wire everything back out. It's like, no, how do you make the tree better? Is there something you can do to make the tree better? Are there some moves you can do with branches that'll make the tree better? So.
I also noticed you approach this from the lowest branch, again, to begin. I know sometimes when we're setting primary structure, we think about, setting that primary branch or the branch that's going to set the flow, set the angle tone for the shoulders and things like that. But your practice is still to come back to the low branch perhaps when you're revisiting a second or third time.
Well, and that's like, that was one thing too when I was looking at this tree before we started working on it. It's like, all right, like what is the direction of the tree? You know, it's like if we come in here, it's like I don't want this to get out too far that way, you know, to the left. Here, because we have, like, there's a hole right there, and that's not like the most attractive thing. And it's like, this is kind of interesting here, but I still think, you know, we can pull this here. Part of it, like I was going to do this, I'll do this so we kind of have an idea here, but I'm going to come back to this because this will be, this too kind of comes out here. These are a little further, so it's like, does this need to come out a little more? Do these need to go back a little more? So I'm going to transition to this. I just, like too, it's like, does this need to go back? And then we can pull these around. Yeah, so you'll see in here, there's still some needles that are curved a little oddly. Or I guess they're just curved. And so we'll take some of those out, but we're not going to take all of them. So I've seen too people with Ponderosas, and they go in and like when they're done, they plucked them like a chicken, right? So there's only a few needles on it, right? They look beautiful. But then next year, because I've seen them the following year, and the next year the needles are like a foot long. So it's like, yeah, they look good for a portion, and then you've lost everything. So, but here, this branch here, this is a good example of it. This branch still needs more refinement.
Tori says, or they're dead.
What, or they're,
yeah, they either have super long needles or they're dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looks like, I think it might be Sam. She's also read about a new method for Ponderosa culture. She dropped a link there. So
She did what?
she read a new method about Ponderosas in their horticulture. She dropped a link there. But can you talk a little bit about sort of overarching horticultural things for these single flushed long needle pines? I know they tend to perplex people a little bit because of the needle length and sort of when we should be working them. Right?
Yeah, I mean, so the ideal time, like I was saying before, the ideal time is coming up in the next month or so. So when they drop the old needles, the third-year needles, that is the best time to work them. Because what we're doing, and I'll still, like I said, you work them at that time, but you also will, if you don't fertilize them any other time of the year, or if you don't fertilize your trees any other time of the year, the fall is the most important time to fertilize them. So they have that extra energy going into winter. But where was I going with that?
Fertilizing in the fall. Third year needles dropping.
Third year.
Gary had a really interesting question. How do you identify a third year needle?
Well, so, okay. I mean, because they'll turn, on Ponderosa, they'll turn yellow.
Yeah.
So that's how you can, I mean, if you like look close, you could probably figure out like, okay, this is this year's, this is last year's, third needles are probably, you know, third year needles are back in there. But, yeah, where was I going with? I thought I had something. Horticulture, fertilizer.
So say you, like, you know, we're at third year needle drop, you're coming back in to see this tree again, you're refining it, and maybe you get to that branch on the left side where it's got a very long terminal bud, and it's a back branching behind it. Would you be considering taking out that leading bud if you had good back budding that had been generated?
Sure, yeah, so like on this tree, at this point, I don't have like anything that's like that. I may on here.
Yeah.
You know, so on this branch here, and when we get in, we'll see. But this is really long. This is really dense. But there could be an opportunity here where if you have strong, like some strong buds back in here, then now also would be, oh, now I remember what I was saying. Now would be a good time to cut this back. And two, what we're doing by removing needles at this time is we are also, so then once Ponderosas drop their third year needles, then from that point on, their needles aren't, this year's needles aren't growing anymore, and they start taking energy, and they start, like all the energy that they make is now for overwintering, right? So the needles quit growing, now they're going to start storing energy. And so then by pulling needles, you're also removing those solar panels that the tree's having to store and gain energy for next year, okay? So let's come back to here.
Yeah, Carrie was saying, what if I accidentally picked them off in the spring? I think they wouldn't be yellow in the spring. You wouldn't necessarily know that they're third year needles. You know, I think what Todd's doing right now is cleaning up some down-growing needles, which I think is always sort of acceptable if you wanted to sort of just generally clean up your tree.
Yeah. So I'm, like, part of what I'm doing, I'm guessing to an extent as to what third year needles are, right? Because it's like, all right, it's not turning yet, but you can kind of make an educated guess. And so also by doing this work now, being that we're a little early, the amount of needle length that this tree will put on because of the work we're doing now is minimal, because we're almost to that point to where it's going to drop those third year needles. So
I think that's Samantha that dropped that Sumo Bonsai article, and I think a lot of what she's mentioning in the chat is what Todd is talking about for a tree in development, sort of fertilizing and watering heavily to promote back budding, and then ultimately over a series of years the needle length should shorten.
yeah.
She mentioned container size as well as a driver for needle length.
Yeah, because like too, the smaller the container, and maybe before we're done I can show you a tree that I have that's in a smaller container. But the smaller container, the less like amount of resources the tree can pull from. And also, you know, it's like you get a Ponderosa or a limber and you put it in a really small container and it dries out quicker. And, you know, so that helps with keeping needle length smaller. So that's absolutely correct. There's only so much energy that a tree in this can store, right? And so like a lot of times you'll see trees in these giant containers and you can't even keep control of them. Or the Ponderosas in huge containers, they're going to always have long needles because there's just too much room for them. So yeah, it's like restricting them.
Sorry guys, yeah, we'll work on muting some folks here. Everybody, if you're unmuted, mute yourselves, please. Oh, hey, looks like Tony's on. Tony's one of our new members. Hey, Tony. He's got a question about fertilizer here. He says, what ratio of fertilizer do you use for the fall? Dr. Earth has a root zone that is 242, and I'm wondering what time of year, if ever, you would use a 242. 242 is pretty low NPK.
That's low.
Yeah. The Dr. Earth I use, Tony, is 555. And I think that's what we got here. Hold on, Todd's checking his bag.
All right, so this new version is 465.
Yeah, so the new Dr. Earth I thought it has is 465. So I think 242 is it's a mild fertilizer.
Which Dr. Earth is that?
Yeah, Tony, do you know which Dr. Earth it is? You're muted.
So here with this branch, as you can see, like this is all, since I wired it, this is all new growth right in here. Okay, but I had my wire here and I have this bud that's really grown back here. So what I'm able to do here then is I can wire this into this branch. And we can run this down, and then this can be our structural piece now. And then we can wire anything smaller off of it.
So next time you splice in a piece of wire, can you show folks how you do that?
Sure.
Because when I was here working with you at the workshop, that was one little piece of knowledge that I thought I sort of knew how to do it, but you had some nuances that I thought were really important to know.
Okay. Yeah, so here when I'm wiring through this, right, we're just, all I'm doing is, it's like, let's see, where do we have needles, and we're making just a little, all I'm doing is making a little path for my wire through that. And we can get here. And then I'm not pulling all the buds or needles at the end. And then I can take this piece of wire, run that into it, and prop it up. So at the bottom of our pads here are bare. They still have needles on the bottom. All right, so then if we look in here, here's a bud that's growing down. And then we have two buds right here next to each other. It's like, these are good. They're just close. So I'm gonna see if I can wire this into one of those two buds.
So you need to lift up a smidgen.
It's hard to see without feedback.
And your feedback.
Hey guys, we're just doing a little camera modification here, little slight camera changes. So.
Good.
All right, so where does this go?
You gonna splice it in?
No, not this one.
Go ahead.
We'll get some splicing in. Don't worry. All right. So we'll wire this into this little bud and see if I can get a little separation here. It was funny, before the meeting tonight, before everyone came over, I was watching Karate Kid, so.
Think tree, Todd.
It's like our start to, a lot of people start to bonsai.
Paint my car, wash my fence.
Yeah. And in the end he wins and gets the girl. It's cute.
If you guys want to revive an oldie but a goodie article from 2 years ago, I wrote a Mr. Miyagi Words of Wisdom for Bonsai.
Nice.
It's in one of the old newsletters. Maybe I'll try to dig that up for you. So while Todd's tackling wiring out that little bud to get some separation there, just so you guys know, this will be uploaded on the YouTube channel likely later this week. And the video is being recorded locally here, and it looks amazing. So that choppiness that you're experiencing, if you watch it on YouTube, you won't see any of that. So if you guys are missing some of the subtlety here, I would encourage you to check it out later on this week. It should be a lot smoother.
Okay. And this little bud, I'm just going to clean it. I'm just going to clean that guy off.
Is there a technique to plucking a needle, Todd? It sounds like a silly question.
I mean, I just grab. I do it one needle at a time, like two. So.
And then it looks like you're pulling out towards you.
I just pull.
Not back towards the tree or anything like that.
Like yeah. So this it's kind of coming down. I just pull it straight out, like that. But yeah, that's funny because like Doug firs, not to get on a Doug fir kick, but. Doug firs, when I'm cleaning the bottom, I won't always pull it towards you. I'll pull it away.
On a fir?
On a fir, and it kind of like it comes off easier and doesn't tear as much.
I'm always afraid of the tissue tearing, if you kind of go back towards the tree.
I don't know. That's what I found out.
We got one question on the chat. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
Well, it looks like that pot has got a bit of a disease, but we had somebody that was interested in it, and they're asking if it's a horse pot.
It's not, but it's an Austrian. So I don't know what it is
okay.
with the Austrians. They like all that disease on it. But this is Lubus Skoda. This is a Skoda.
Oh.
Yeah, this is Skoda. So I have a couple Skoda containers. So I like Skoda. All right, so we got this. Let's come in here. Like that maybe this needs to come down, because if you look here, like at this line here, like that's not, it's okay, but it's not like the most beautiful line, right? And so if you look in here too, right here, so I wedge cut this. So this tree was wedge cut here, was wedge cut here, to bring it forward and then to bring this to the right, because it was like, it was back and way over here, so, but I wanted to bring it down and over so it would kind of interact with this portion, so that's what that is right there. All right, so now let's go here. So this is kind of one thing that's fun too with Ponderosas. It's like the buds and the amount of like wire that you have to put on them is fairly minimal compared to a lot of other trees. You know, it's like we'll put on maybe 20 pieces of wire and the tree's done, you know, whereas with a lot of other trees, it just because the buds that you have to wire are a lot less on Ponderosa. So it's...
Todd, there's a question.
Yeah.
How long ago was it wedge cut?
So this was wedge cut 2016. So over like 4 years ago. 4 years ago I did it.
I didn't even notice it until you pointed it out.
Yep.
So it healed pretty well.
Pretty well, but it was also one of the first wedge cuts I did. So it's not it's not as clean as some of my other ones. So if that's going there. See if I can get this.
So you have another question?
All right.
Could you explain what a wedge out is? What a wedge cut is?
Wedge cut. So a wedge cut is, excuse me, when you take a branch And it's very close to what it sounds like. But let's say this is a branch right here, and so what I did there, what you do is you come in with a saw. So like this is a really like a fine saw, and I won't do it on my arm, but you cut in 50% into here. So let's say like this branch is here and you want to bring it in, right? So you come in, oh, is this right?
Yep.
You come in, cut it 50%, and then like this wants to come this way. So then I'll come here, cut in 50%. You just cut a wedge out, you know, like a little pie wedge. And then when you move the branch, but when you do it, you have to make sure the back of the branch is still alive, because if you cut here and all this is dead, then you've killed the branch. So you always have to kind of check. But when you cut that, then the branch has, because you took out all the resistance on this side and the compression that would happen, then this doesn't stretch nearly as much. And so you cut it, and then you can bring those two parts together, and so you can get like bigger bends on big branches, you know, that you normally couldn't bend without, you know, where it would break it normally. So
I actually have a question. Do you then chase that cut with raffia for added compression as it's healing?
no, so after you do a wedge cut, what I do is I'll take, like let's say I cut here to bring a branch like into here, right? So then what I do is you take putty, not cut paste. You take putty, and then I'll take that putty and run it all along that wedge cut. Okay, so it completely covers the wedge cut, 50% around. Then I'll take cut paste. And this not everyone does this, but I'll take cut paste then and put it over top as a second, like kind of sealant, and then
Parafilm.
here it is, parafilm. So this is like a waxy, like a stretchy kind of tape, but you can wrap that over top and it compresses it, and it also will keep out any moisture. So that's kind of how I you know, treat.
So Todd, we have a follow-up. So sort of like air layering?
So sort of like air layering?
No.
I think it's different.
No, it's not like air layering. Because air layering, you're just cutting out, you know, getting down to cutting out the cambium around. You're ringing the entire branch. On a wedge cut, you're cutting out a wedge in the branch, but leaving 50% intact. So I've done wedge cuts on pines. I've never done them on spruces. I've never done them on firs. So I'm not sure how they work on some of those other species.
It's been done though?
Yes, it has been done, but I'm not sure. To be honest, I'm not sure what the success rate was of it or how the tree responded. So.
Does it have to do with the vascular growth of the tree and how it compartmentalizes the vascular tissue, or is it just pines tend to wedge cut easy?
Yeah, so I think part of it, I don't know, it could be like the amount of sap flow that's through it.
So I have another question,
Uh-huh.
slightly different topic. My Ponderosa is in development, has some long spindly branches with growth only at the tips.
Yep.
Do I work on creating back budding and cut back to a bud to shorten the branch?
Well, okay, so you have a branch that's very spindly at the tips,
Yes.
and then
Just growth at the tips, yeah.
just growth at the tips, and then there's buds further in, or there are no buds.
My guess is on a Ponderosa there's no buds. It's a long spindly branch with some growth at the tips. But we'll get some feedback in the chat.
Yeah, can they
No
clarify?
buds.
No buds. So I would not. I wouldn't cut it back. I would just like if it's a tree you've worked on, I would make sure it's getting a lot of sun, but I would fertilize it. So there are techniques where, and two, I've seen it in like character pines where in the winter, once they start dropping old needles, they cut it's like the eye, which is the bud. You cut that out and you get back budding back. But on a tree in a container, I think if you do that, you have a greater chance of losing that whole branch. So I would just fertilize, I'd water, and I would give it a lot of sun. That's what I would do. So now this, see if we can bring it. Like two, this is really long. And there's nothing to the end. It's like I think we need it.
That's a common condition on the Ponderosa, where you have a lot of branch and sort of foliage at the end. And I mean, just looking at your design here, I think there's a lot of undulation that you put into the branch movement that sort of helps with that, right? Because I can see that this branch moves directly back here, perhaps to take out some of that length. And then you're able to get things around to sort of tuck the foliage in to frame the Deadwood here.
Yeah, and so that's one thing too with Ponderosa, like they're flexible, right? So they, like I don't raffia Ponderosa pines, like I will with some other species, so I can just watch how they tear. But they'll usually tear before they break. And even like in the mountains, you can see ponderosas, and like they're beat up, and they have branches like completely torn off. And this branch that was up here is now laying on the ground, and there's just like this teeny little sliver of live tissue connecting it, and they're still alive. So ponderosas are really, really tough trees. So here, let me clean this up a little more. All right, so that's going to be... All right, so let's get some of these back branches done.
Hey, so we're getting asked if we can hear people in the meeting. No, we can't. So we can only hear you via chat. So if you've got any questions, just type there. If you do want me to mute someone, just call them out and I'll mute them.
Did you guys hear that? If you have questions we can't hear you, you're going to have to put them in the chat.
So if we look at this, this is a back branch. And this was actually, it's kind of interesting. This was facing north. But as we clean this up and we're very careful, we can see this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 buds right here. So this could be this year I'm not going to do it. I'm going to let these grow more for 1 more year. But if these really take off, then next year this could be a good instance where to push this in a little more, actually this long portion here gets cut back to there. And then these start to take over. Okay?
They just look a little too weak for you to do that?
Just a touch, because they're more like needle clusters instead of an actual
big fat bud, yeah, with a lot of needles.
Anything that's really, strong. This could be just fine, but I'm a little nervous at this point to cut this off and risk losing this, because there's not a ton of needle mass there compared to what we have with this. Okay, so here I'm gonna splice in a wire so you can see that.
Let's do it.
So here, we'll turn here.
Okay, we'll get in close on the detail here.
let's see where this is gonna go. Here. Okay, so if we look, here, come right here. I don't know if you can see this, but right here, here's the branch and here's the wire. And there's a little gap between the branch and the wire. And so what I'm going to do is I'll take this 10 gauge, I'm going to cut it at an angle like that. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to splice this in between the branch and the wire, just like that. And then support. And then now you can run a piece of wire in so we can have control of the tip down here. And we have a bud here on top. We have a bud there. We have a bud there. So actually, I'm going to still try to preserve this. And prop these up. But see, you can see how long, like these needles are long, right? So then next year when I don't fertilize, those needles that we get will start to be shorter, so then we can start transitioning this to a tree with some shorter needles. Too, this is something where like bigger trees, like smaller trees for Ponderosa will always, it'll be a struggle. You know, it's like how many realistic showing Ponderosa pines have you seen? You
I've
know,
only seen one, and it belongs to Will Kearns. He's got that one with the tiny little needles on it, but it was just.
But that's a dwarf.
It is?
It's a dwarf.
Did it come from Jerry Morris?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Will has
So
just been
that's
telling me
why-
it's a standard old Ponderosa,
No,
and it's real special.
no. It is special.
So we have a question from the floor.
Question.
What soil mix are you using for your Ponderosa?
So for this,
so
that's good. So for Ponderosa, I use. So if I'm ever doing like 1-1-1, 2-1-1, it's always Akadama first, pumice, lava, and so I plant everything in pumice, Akadama, lava, some sort of mix like that. And so with pines, it's 1-1-1. It's 1-1-1, so it's 1 part Akadama, 1 part pumice, and 1 part lava. So in Oregon, like at Ryan's, when like during our studies there and during repotting in Oregon, Ryan pulls out the 1/16 of an inch, but they also get more water. So here in Colorado, because it's a lot drier than it is out there, I leave the 1/16 inch in. So
That's interesting.
yeah.
Even on a big tree like this?
Yep. Yep.
Another splice job
Yep,
there, huh?
there's another splice because there's nothing to wire into this. So we have to splice in a piece of wire.
So there's a follow-up.
Yep.
So wait until back buds are strong before cutting back to shorten the branch length.
Yes.
And use curves and bend to visually shorten the branch length.
Yes. But we don't want. you don't want to just like
Give it the
create this, you know, this kind of spaghetti of of bends with them. And I mean, sometimes like you just have really long branches, so it's addressing that. But if there's a way, you know, sometimes when you're setting structure like that and you have a really long branch, depending on where it is, it's like sometimes you can take that branch and instead of like bringing it down here, you know, it's like here's the trunk, and instead of bringing it down here, maybe it comes down into the back, so you can shorten that line, you know, and then you can put it in the back, so you don't see like this really long branch. Or sometimes like is there foliage around it that you can cover up that long line, you know. So there's. But yes, what you're saying is I'm not trying to
within reason.
confuse
Within reason,
what you're
sure,
saying. Yeah. But it's like, is there a way where you can bend it but still make it look beautiful?
So Todd, I noticed you have a Deadwood feature at the top of this tree here. And right now it almost looks like just a cut.
Yeah.
It's kind of gin here.
Yep.
Looks like maybe it was just kind of lopped off.
Yep.
I tried to avoid those sort of like pencil point gins on my pines.
Sure.
How do you think about Deadwood or working something that you had to cut off?
Yeah, so this, I don't know if I did it last year or the year before. I had, like, this came up and it's like, I'm going to use everything. So I had, like, this tree that was up here too, and it was like, that just looks bad. It looked bad, and it didn't fit, and I was seeing this, and it's like, oh, that works. So at the time, I just cut that off and then took the wire off. It's like, I'll deal with that later, and I guess I haven't yet. But with like ponderosas and pines in general,
Yeah, they've got these little sort of stubby.
yeah, it's
tips
like
here.
nubs, and they're not like really sharp nubs, you know. It's like they're more rounded.
Yeah, there's a couple nice ones down here.
Like here, yeah, it's like they're not like junipers, you know, or back here there's some, but it's
Yeah.
more kind of rounded pieces of deadwood than sharp and pointy pieces.
So we have another question.
Uh-huh.
I'll ignore the one about the RNC.
What is it? What? Oh, the national. Okay.
What is your thoughts on using turf as opposed to Akadama?
So I used Turfus. I used to use Turfus, you know, and I used it for a long time, and I don't know if I ever killed trees. I think I killed trees out of collection, putting them in Turfus, but I mean, until this year, I had a tree, a limber pine that was like a Turfus kind of lava pine bark mix, so they can live in it. But I mean, trees can live in horrible conditions, and so I don't use Turfus for anything anymore. And I wouldn't, because there's better options, you know. They're better as like, oh, it's cheap, and it's like pumice is cheap. Everything, you know, Akadama is your most expensive thing, and it's like a bag for $45 is not that much, and it lasts a while. So there are better options, and I wouldn't use Turfus for anything. So. Does the person asking the question use Turfus? And people can be like, oh, well, my trees did great in Turfus, or they're still alive. It's like...
Yeah. I know Bob Randall, I mean, because he has so many trees, I mean, he uses Turfus in place of the Akadama component, and has had really good success. So I think, you know, there are plenty of folks that still believe in Turfus and still use it. It tends to be the folks that have the economy of scale and really need a lot of aggregate. You know?
I have 200 trees out
Yeah,
there, and
yeah.
I don't have a thing in Turfus.
Yeah.
So I don't believe in that argument.
You don't buy that argument?
I don't buy that argument. So.
Get rid of your Turfus, everybody.
Well, yeah, I mean, things can live in Turfus. They can live in it, but there's better options where your trees will thrive over just living, you know?
Sure.
So. Yeah, yeah.
Very interesting blog post from Michael Hagedorn that Tom Engelwood sent around about trees growing in turfus and oil dry and some other substrates. And the blog post actually has...
Was that recent or was that
it was 2013, I think. So it was quite a few years ago, but he has photos of the root systems that they develop out of particularly oil dry and some of those components that just set up these really hydrophobic zones and don't really look great. They're really stringy and not a lot of root mass.
Yeah. Yeah, so like the root systems out of when you repot trees or you put them into their first bonsai container that are in like straight pumice or something like, or if they're in a bonsai container they have an akadama kind of pumice lava type mix, the root systems are more like they're more compact and they're like they're solid, you know, whereas a lot of the ones with turfus, the roots are really fine and stringy and not, it's not as healthy of a root system. So anyway, I won't
get on your turfus soapbox.
Yeah, it's like because I used turfus for a long time, but there's better options, so I wouldn't use turfus period anymore. So there, same thing, spliced in, right? Spliced in, wired down to the tips, and pluck the needles that are hanging down.
Does this tree remind you of anything, Todd? It's just that it's such an unusual trunk on this tree. Have you guys seen it? It almost looks like a rhinoceros or something.
Yeah, so actually this tree, me and Larry went collecting, and we dug it, and I was like, oh, that's a cool tree. And he's like, yeah. And so he had it, and then he needed like some trees for a workshop he was doing, and so he's like, do you want that tree? I'll trade it. So I was like, sure, I'll take it. And I think he said, like, because you guys like to like cut it and bend them a lot. So I was like, yeah.
You proceeded to wedge cut it and bend
So
it a lot.
I proceeded to wedge cut it, yeah. But no, Larry actually collected this tree. And so when I got it, and just loving like this little swirl here, because it's like the tree's nice. And like this, so this root was way out here. And so to get it in the container, I had to guy this into the container, and so a guy wire went here around the back into a screw to actually compress it enough to get it in. But
it's bizarre.
Yeah,
it's cool looking.
Yeah, it's a neat tree. So it's like, yeah, this is a tree Larry collected, but
there is a question about akadama, which I suspect you might have more luck in the chat. So, can you find akadama locally? I don't believe you can, but
like in the mountain, like where you can dig it.
I assume where you can purchase it.
Oh, I mean the club. Does the club still do that?
Last I heard, you had the last stock. So if you have some left.
So no, because I think all the club akadama is gone. But what you can do is, so the club, maybe that's something the club wants to do again, is purchase akadama, and they were doing it from Eastern Leaf, and so that's where I like get all mine. But you can get, I think Eastern Leaf had a thing where if you spent more than, I don't know, $75 or something like that, you got free shipping. So, but akadama, you can get it, like you can get it from there, you can get it from Jonas, you can get it from Superfly, so there's all sorts of places you can get it. I don't know of, of anywhere.
So the chat is saying Eastern Leaf is a good source.
Yeah, it is.
I found it on eBay, I know that. Dave has put in chat as well, the club has pumice and lava for sale. If interested, just please email the club.
All right, so there is an order.
But no akadama, sorry.
Yeah, and then someone's asked, what is the difference between akadama and kunuma?
Right, so kunuma, it's part of it is, so kunuma is very acidic, and so kunuma is more acidic. It also like just kind of how it's put together and where it's pulled from, like in the layer. And I'm not sure if kunuma is higher up or if akadama is higher up, but more of it's like the acidity, like amount of water it holds. You know, there's all sorts of like how the pores are made. So
I've never heard of Kanuma.
Kanuma
Yeah. Never
for
heard.
like azaleas.
Oh, I don't have any azaleas. Maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
Azaleas are kind of acid loving, so maybe that's part of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but I have an aspen, and so I did a test because aspen are everything that I pot or that I put into a bonsai container, I use some sort of mix with akadama, pumice, and lava, except for deciduous and except for like redwoods and things like that. But Kanuma, like azaleas, you put in straight Kanuma. Oh, and so I took an aspen, I put it in straight Kanuma to see versus akadama because it grows in very acidic soil and it's doing really well.
Yeah, that
So-
aspen's cool.
Mm-hmm. But it's like I should get another one and put it in akadama and just
You
see
should
what
get a
the
cheaper one and put it in. If you're going to experiment on your trees.
yeah experiment
don't use
on
your
a
one super nice aspen,
yeah
you know?
yeah.
I can get you some at Home Depot. We can run some experiments.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
So Todd, I think something that comes up often with Ponderosa pines and the
Uh-huh.
long needle length, particularly I think for more shohin and chewing sized trees, the
Right.
smaller variety. I've heard a lot of professionals, especially wanting to graft other types of foliage,
Sure.
perhaps smaller, multi-flush.
Yeah, black pine.
Yeah. Do you have any experience with that? I know. Ryan Neal has a few trees that have been grafted.
Yeah, so actually this year, so I don't have any here that are, I don't have any here that are grafted. So usually I think with grafting too, maybe 50% of the grafts take. But I think like on Ponderosa, if you grafted, you could, well, Scots pine, black pine. I think a pine, I've never seen one, but Ponderosa with white pine, I think that could be something pretty special. So, but yeah, I think you get down to certain sizes, and it's just the foliage is so large. I don't know if you could ever have a true kind of bonsai form with the Ponderosa foliage. So here, I'm trying to just break these up and use that foliage mass to fill in space, right? So let's say this is a pad, but this is really, there's 3 buds there, but they're all small, So like this is an instance where instead of taking these 2 branches and putting it like this and taking up all that space, it's like we're gonna spread out the foliage of Ponderosa, and so that's one way that you can start to like really fill in and make, because like here, so we need something back here, and so maybe this can fill in there, but it's like all these are kind of built, all these little pads are built off of like one branch with foliage and a few buds in there that we're filling in. So that's one thing when you're, like I was saying before, when you design Ponderosas, you have to have a different approach to how you create your pads.
It's like Dusty Crafts has got a aspen and pure Kanuma also. It says it's doing great, but it doesn't get attacked by aphids.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't get attacked by aphids anymore.
Oh, it doesn't? Oh, wow. The Japanese beetles eat all your stuff here, Todd? Because they eat all sorts of stuff at my house, but The interesting thing is they don't really go after my deciduous bonsai.
Uh-huh.
So I've got like Virginia creeper vines and a bunch of trees in my yard.
Virginia creepers, they'll eat.
It's like
they'll annihilate.
It's like Swiss cheese.
Yeah,
I'm like they skeletonize it.
Yep.
But I've got they'll eat a Chinese elm in my yard, but they haven't eaten my Chinese elm bonsai, which is really interesting.
So this year, it's been weird because I've been home, and so this spring, there were all sorts of beetles. They weren't Chinese beetles, but they were some beetle, and I saw them on the same thing. I have some amber maples, and so they were on the amber maples, but they didn't really do like a whole lot of damage to them. But I kept spraying. But then I have like Siberian elms right over there, and those just get
launched,
destroyed every year. But yeah, but I don't know. It's like we have grasshoppers now, and so I've seen them on some of the conifers, but I don't know. I don't know if they're eating like needles that much on whether locusts do. I don't know if anyone knows that or not, but I haven't noticed it.
You know, in the hierarchy of things that are hazardous to the bonsai in my yard, I'm definitely at the top of the food chain as being the most hazardous organism. I think followed close second by squirrels who like to dig in the pots.
Squirrels have been picking up here as well. All right, so we have a few, 1, 2, and then we'll look at this apex.
The apex does feel a little egregious right now. It's like the biggest, baddest part of the whole tree.
Well, it's the apex too, right? So that makes sense, it being the apex where it's going to be the strongest.
Yeah.
Someone said squirrels are bad, deers are worse.
Oh, deer.
Yeah, sorry, we don't have deer in the
Who
city
said
here.
that?
Tom.
Oh,
Tom Mankiewicz.
Yeah, I was like, it's someone that's lived. I didn't know if it was Tom or
If it's someone that
Stephen
sits
Lee or someone up in the mountains that are dealing with deer. Yeah, who was it? I was talking to someone recently and they said, because they had just moved somewhere, and the deer with ponderosas, they just ate them down to nothing. Oh, and it was over winter. Yeah, it was over. It was Mike Britton. Mike Britton, when he first moved to his new place.
Way out in Florissant, the deer doing some bonsai for him.
And so he had to adjust really quickly. So this is one spot where I'm gonna actually take this wire off.
All right, I'm gonna come in close here.
Because I have a piece of wire here and here, and this ends right here, and this was ending in here. And so for me, it's gonna be easier if I just take out this piece of wire and just rewire this whole little portion.
Sorry, I'm up in your face here.
But this is it too, like on the second working, like how do you use wire? You know, it's like I'm not rewiring the entire tree. You know, it's like we'll splice in where we can, use the wire to adjust the branching where we can, and then you know, use as little wire as possible.
A common question we get a lot is, how long do you expect the wire to need to stay on this tree before you can really be confident that the structure you've set will stay?
Yep. So on a tree, so the wire on this has been here 4 years, and like you can see right here, it's biting in.
Yeah.
And that's pretty.
That's good. That's getting there.
That's a pretty good bite right there.
It's getting there.
You know, so when it gets to this point, that's a point where you could, you know, take that off. And so in the fall, like right now is when the branches are starting to put on that, like that, the volume, because they're getting ready for the foliage that it's going to put on next year. So it puts on vascular tissue. So then it's preparing for next year. So then when it grows, it has the vascular tissue to support that new growth. So right now is a time where you're going to have to watch out for that. So you can, if it's biting in too much, you could do it now. Or you can also wait and do it in the spring, because in the spring, do it right before it starts pushing, because it has, like, if it's really biting in, if you do it too late in the year, maybe you damage it a little more and maybe you lose that branch. So one, just be careful, or two, like, I'll probably wait until next spring to remove that, and then when the tree starts to grow and it's going to move a lot of resources, then it can heal any of those, any of that damage.
I'm gonna try to get you guys in real tight here. We're right at 8:20, but I want to show you the piece of wire that Todd's looking at that's biting in, because this is a really common question. And so we're looking at this piece right here on this really acute bend, and I'm putting my finger on it, and it's almost, I think it's almost buried. I can just feel the sort of raised edge there, and I think that's the point where, you know, we start to think about taking it off, that the structure's set.
Yep.
A little bit of biting is good.
You
I've
have
heard.
to. On conifers, you have to have it bite in, or it's not gonna set. So that's one thing you see a lot of, is people taking the wire off too early.
All right, we're gonna get out long here, Todd, for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's say you had a beautiful beach with pristine
Right.
bark,
That is
right?
the worst thing that you.
You don't want to have those wires bite, right?
Right. Yep.
So what are you trying to do? I guess is the big question.
I think we can hear people as well.
All right. So let's do this apex here.
Now, would it be okay to put the tree down just a touch if you're
Oh,
going to
sure.
apex? It's just
Yeah.
We're starting to lose your head in the top of the tree just slightly there.
Right there.
I think it's better, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
And Evan's going to adjust a bit from our end.
All right. And so this is something actually I wonder. I want to bring this in. So I have a guy wire here. So I'm going to actually. So when I first did this move, I bent this as far as I could until I got, I felt uncomfortable.
That happens sometimes.
That it's like, I don't know, I don't want to kill this branch, right? So I stopped, but then now it's like, all right, it's done okay. Here's that next time where I can maybe cinch this in a little tighter and then readjust.
Yeah.
So now this is further in the back. And then now we can kick these back out. All right, so let's do the apex. See, but this is an instance, like if you look here, like see this, how this is on that inside of that curve?
What do you mean by this?
This branch right here.
The branch is emerging from the inside of the curve.
Of this curve. So instead of trying to bring it out into here and we have this empty space, it's like, oh, the logical thing to do is just to take that, push it in the back, and then you hide a lot of that bend.
Yeah.
And yet you're still getting foliage back here.
This is an interesting conversation here too. The branch just after that, where it looks like it was sort of emerging from the top here, and you've made it come really laterally and just to the front of the tree.
Yeah, because it's on the top, and there's nothing really here until we get branching here. So it's like you have to use that.
It's got to come out.
Yeah.
10%.
Yep, you got to use it. All right, so
I'm gonna back up a minute. We'll go out long.
So by pulling this in, this took this apex and pushed it to the, when you're looking at the tree, to the right, right? So now I think now we have nothing over here, and you see that, right?
Sure.
So it's,
Pauline's asking a question.
Pauline. All right, go ahead, Pauline.
How tall is the Ponderosa? And what size is the pot?
Ooh,
so the Ponderosa
Take measure.
from here, I bet it's
a couple of feet. Couple and a half.
maybe 28 inches. And the container's 18 inches maybe?
Got a beer can next to it.
Yeah, here's
Well, how tall is a beer can?
beer can is beer can size. Here's the scale for you. Yeah, this is a 2-foot tree, maybe a little more, and this container is at least 16 or 18 inches this way. Is that my beer? No, it's your beer. Okay.
So I know we have beer here. I don't ever work on trees and drink beer.
No, it's the cameraman and the director.
I know, no, I'm just
It's just
saying,
the
yeah, it's the
directors.
cameraman, the director, they can drink beer all they want, but I don't ever. Because I had a Doug fir several years ago in 2012, I think, and I was making this big bend on it, and I'd been drinking beer, and I broke the branch and killed it, and so after that, I was like, all right, I guess I'll never do that again. So. So too, as you can see, I have a block under this. So what's happened, and I have a couple Ponderosas here that have done that. I repotted it, and I think I did a really good job of stabilizing it. But the tree just kind of has
The snow and over
snow,
time.
or just like the Ponderosas and limbers too. Sometimes I think they'll start, but Ponderosas especially, they just start wherever the weight is. If the weight's this way, to the right, they just kind of start doing that. So
I mean, that brings up an interesting question. If you're not completely satisfied with the planting angle, tree looks a little bit loose in the pot to me when you're doing heavy work. I mean, would you force a repot next year if it's still got good percolation? Would you let it ride? What would you do there? 'Cause I think this is something I think about a lot.
yeah, I would. I'd repot it.
You'd repot it?
Sure.
Okay.
Because I have a Ponderosa that I redid, that I changed the planting angle, and I don't know if it was. I think it also was one of those that kind of sagged a little more over maybe 2 years ago when I repotted it, and so it sagged down. And so next year I'm going to do it. Like with this, I even went in before we started this and even like cinched down the wire even a little more. But it's leaning a little forward. So what I would do is I would come in next year, bring this out, see what the root system looks like, but I would maybe like just kind of scratch the bottom a little and scratch the sides, and then it's like, okay, this is going forward, so what that means is this top needs to come down and the back needs to come up so we can bring it back.
So not like a full-fledged repot.
No, not a full-fledged at all. I would just, well, depending on what the root system looks like when you get in there. But if the roots, and there's still a lot of, area that doesn't have, it's not root bound, I would just do a partial. Because too, this was last year. And so usually with conifers, when you repot them, I don't know, I did one this year that had been in the container for 8 years. And the container's like this big. Mm-hmm. So every 5 to 8 years is when you repot conifers. So. All right, this is the last. There'll be 2 pieces of wire, and then we're done.
We're getting close. Anything on the chat there, Evan?
No, someone said looks great.
Oh, good.
Yeah, good.
Looks horrible. Do it over.
Yeah.
Is that good there, Evan?
Yep, all good.
But I really do. I really like Ponderosas, and I don't know. This year I fell back in love with Ponderosas, and I fell back in love with Douglas fir. And so there was a time where I don't know, I just wasn't as enthusiastic about Douglas firs, because they can be a little finicky, and they don't, they should respond like this, but they don't always, and so that was something this year, and it was nice being home, because I was able to work on them work on them a lot more. So we are here. So it's like, is this?
Let's go back out long and take a look with you.
Like now it's like, all right, what does the apex look like? Like, do we keep this over here?
Do you want some feedback?
Or does...
You want to vote in the chat?
Oh, sure.
All right.
Or does this, like, here's my question.
Give us our options, Todd. What are you thinking?
People, you can unmute as well now. We can hear you. I think we resolved that.
So if we're here and we're looking at this, there's nothing here, right?
In the back?
Right here.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And so do we take this, do we pull this around and then this becomes our apex and then this comes kind of down? Maybe we push this back more to try to get a little something and pull this then back around, like into here. If this comes here, then we're right on top of this, right? So then... So then maybe this actually needs to come up. And this started on the top anyway, so maybe this comes up and we push this to the back, and then maybe this comes around and fills in this area. I don't know. I am just playing.
It's a little spaghetti, but you could also continue this one around to the back, this big one, right?
Mm-hmm. But I was thinking for this, like, do you come back and then pull it back forward?
Oh,
Yeah.
Tom agrees.
Yeah.
Tom,
Is that Tom?
Yep.
angle width?
Yes.
So I need to actually, I cut my wire a touch short.
Oh, you still do that too?
Yeah. It's all splicing. Like 2 turns. I'm 2 turns short. Let's see how that looks.
So once we resolve this apex, ladies and gentlemen, I think, there had been some folks that were having a discussion about a number of sort of health issues they've been seeing with their trees. A lot of pine trees and spruces. So maybe once Todd has reconciled the apex here, if you guys have questions about those things, maybe typing them in the chat.
Go speak.
Yeah, or you can speak this time because we can hear you. Sorry we couldn't hear you earlier, Walter. But once Todd's done with this, the apex work here, maybe we can rap about that a little bit. Can you guys hear me? Just say yes. No.
Okay, so here's that, here's that.
Coming forward.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, a lot of times when I'm done, I just kind of tap the branches, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's not as bushy as I thought it was. Because so if this comes here,
Yes.
and then this that was on top, why don't we... We're just going to pull this up here.
So I want to show you the move that Todd's doing right now, guys, because it's not one that I would have even considered, but I think it really is an interesting one that's sort of filling that space he was talking about. So maybe once he's done, we'll get in close and take a look at it.
Okay, and then one more piece of wire.
I've actually got it before as well. I've actually got it before. So if I do this now, This is what it looked at the beginning.
Oh, we got a before and after.
Yeah,
look
let's
at,
see
look
the
at
before.
Evan, man.
So you can all see that. That's what it looked like before.
And where's the after?
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Huh.
Evan was the right man for the job, ladies and
I
gentlemen.
know it helps when you have a IT.
Well, the only reason that works is because that camera broke, and so it's frozen on that screen. So that wasn't intentional, but in future, I think.
Don't
that should
tell
be.
us that.
It's serendipity. Pat, we're going to get to your question in 1 minute once Todd's done here.
You go on the side.
All right, so we're going to get in close here and take a look at this move as Todd is finishing up his wiring job here. Let me get you guys stabilized 1 second.
Okay. If you want to do that, I'm just going to clean
Sure.
some of these needles.
So this branch right here is the one that's really an interesting idea. And I don't know if you can see from, if we get down here, it's sort of emanating from below here on top of the branch. And what Todd's done is actually come against the grain of the tree, tucked it up under the main branch of the apex, and come straight back to fill the space here. Can you guys see that? It's like sort of counter to what I would have even considered doing with that branch, but it really fills that space nicely. And so one of the interesting things I've made a habit of after demos is trying to go up and take a look at the trees that the professionals have styled and look for those little moments where they may have done something completely different than what you would have seen or what you would have done, and try to reason through why they made that sort of unorthodox move. But I think it works.
I mean, this too, because that's,
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about right there.
yeah. And it's like, all right, so that's never going to be beautiful, right? But we needed something back in here, and it's like, actually, we can probably
Hide it even a little bit more.
and maybe build this, like as this fills in back here, we can actually build this into part of the apex. And it emerged on top of this, so we can hide it by this branch coming down, and then it also fills a function of filling in the back of that. So that was just my logic. It's like, how do you put something back here? Because this you could swing around, but then you're going to have this big bare spot on here.
Because that's what I would have done, and you would have seen that big throw of the branch.
Yeah, you
A
would
bunch
see
of
that,
wire
and
and
it's
no
like how
foliage.
you can't cover that up. So,
Oh.
so that was my,
Well, shucks.
well, shoot. So yeah, I think that's about it here.
Cool, we're going to get back out to the long shot here for you guys.
We'll show you the before.
We'll show you a little before and after action too. So Pat Deutschman had a question about a Colorado spruce, I think, maybe perhaps a blue, that had sort of lost all of the needles except for the very apex. I think there were a number of people that felt like their spruces were a little scorched after the winter. I know a few of mine, you know, the needles just looked brown or purple when they came out of the cold frame. Lost a little bit, but still generated budding. And she was
Well-
wondering, you know, are there techniques to sort of save a spruce, generate budding?
Yeah, so if it was purple, usually that's a fungus, and
Yeah.
so purple needles, that's Rhizosphaera.
Because that's what I had on mine.
And so then you can spray that with Mancozeb, which is what that's what I spray with that. So too, like if Pat's saying that yeah, that it was dropping needles except for when did that happen?
Yeah, Pat, can you
Or when was it repotted too? Was it repotted this year?
Yeah, Pat, you can come off mute and just chat with us here. You have idea about the tree? I know you guys kind of lost some spruces this year. Maybe Pat-
Like too, what was
Pat's on
the?
break.
I said no.
It wasn't repotted.
It wasn't repotted. Or she says no, she's not coming off mute.
Okay. I don't know. It's like, where was it kept? Because up where she is, it's like that's a whole different thing than being down here.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, well, where was it kept?
So it wasn't repotted, came out of the cold frame, great, then spring weather, drop needles.
Yeah.
It sounds like that April cold.
Yeah, I mean, so did you protect it during that cold snap, or did you leave them out, or
Yes.
you protected it?
I just got yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell if it just dropped needles, but it could be, like, there could have been some damage from last year at some time for whatever reason, and then once it came out and it started waking up, it could drop branches. It could be a borer that got into some branches. You know, it could be, without seeing the tree, it's a little hard, but there could be a couple things. All right, so I think I'm done here for now. So I guess with like this whole like talk and going through all this, one of the things is like timing on Ponderosas and everything that you, like any work that you do on Ponderosas, like it's like if you do this, the tree does this, and on Ponderosas it seems like that needle length and that reaction to work, depending on when you do it, is a little more extreme than some other plants, but also like it's patience, and it's this game of cat and mouse with Ponderosas, because you can get, here, I'll show you.
Sorry guys, Todd just left. He'll be back, I think.
I just got up and left.
He's coming back, I promise. Here he is.
Okay, so I dug this tree a long time ago. This is one of the first trees I ever dug. But this is a Ponderosa. And so these are like all the, can you see that all right? All the techniques that I've talked about. I didn't fertilize this last year till the fall. It's in a pretty small container. And look at the needles. Like this is a small Ponderosa, and it looks pretty realistic, you know, for a bonsai being this small and being a Ponderosa. So like all the techniques we're talking about, it works. You know, I'm not starving it of water, but I'm not overwatering it. You know, it's like I let Ponderosas dry out a little more than I would spruces. But you can get, I mean, there's my hand, you know, it's like you can get small needles on Ponderosas over time. So
Couple questions. One from Graham. He's wondering, what are your techniques for overwintering Ponderosa here in Denver, since we have such wide temperature springs?
yeah, so I just swings.
All right.
I just put them on the ground out here. So like ideally, I have a bunch of trees, so I can't do it with all of them, but I'll just put them on the ground, or I'll put some, like sometimes I'll put them in, I have a greenhouse, and it doesn't get down below 20 in the greenhouse. So those Ponderosas, they're protected, but 90% of the Ponderosas I have, I just leave them out on the ground. They do just fine.
Yeah, that's what I'll do too. Every now and then I'll heal the pots in, not entirely, with some mulch, and just keep them protected from wind.
So if you have like a minimal number of trees and you can mulch your trees in, I would put mulch up to like the bottom of the container right here and just bury the container in mulch right up to there, and the trees they'll do just fine like that. So
yeah, Bob Randall had an interesting observation where he had mulched his pots in over the top. You know, I think some of the traditional teaching will say mulch it up to the first branch.
Yeah.
And he had some depth where he thought the water was
you
running
can't get
off
in
the
there.
mulch.
The water
Yeah.
you can't get it. Yeah, you can't.
Just runs off the
Yeah.
side.
So
Another question. Let's see. Next up, do junipers regenerate back needles? That's from Pauline. I'm not sure if it's a question about back budding or if we're talking about.
I mean, junipers will back bud, if that's what you're asking, and usually when they do that, they'll push new growth out of crotches. They'll push it out like the shoulders. So junipers will.
They'll back bud fairly readily.
Yep.
And then, you know, I know Will Kearns had a number of issues with his limber pines and sort of being a little bit scalded coming out of your collection.
Yeah.
I know you have one here that you got brown tips on that you think is related to watering.
I do.
Have you noticed any diseases with our limbers lately, or anything that you've kind of heard about or techniques for diagnosing disease with limbers?
I mean, so on my limber where the tips are brown, I mean too, because there's like Dothostroma, like needle cast, and so like you can look, and if you look like closely, you can see the spores on there, and but on those it's just like the very tips on my limber, and so that's more related to water, where like the majority of the needles are brown and then the bases are green. That's more like a needle cast.
Yeah, if you're able to see those fruiting bodies sort of dotting throughout there.
Yeah, but yeah, like Will had some problems with limbers, and maybe I don't know, maybe like does it get too much wind? Like when it's really cold and the wind comes, depending on where he has it, and then that desiccates those needles. That's something too. So I always try to put it up, protect my trees as much as I can, which you can't like completely. I can't completely do that, but like up kind of a north-facing fence that kind of keeps them out of the way of, and being on the ground too will kind of help keep them out of the wind.
Yeah.
So.
Especially when the pots are frozen. If that wind kicks
The
up,
wind's
they
frozen,
can't
or the
mobilize
pots
water.
are frozen, the wind's blowing like crazy, and they have nothing to.
Yeah.
Yeah, the needles just get desiccated. So.
We got a question from Colin Home, which I think is Samantha. If I wire my Ponderosa this fall, can I repot it in the spring? I think the answer there is maybe.
That's exactly right. It's like what was the work, and how did it go? So I just worked on a Ponderosa that I had had for 3 years, and the tree is big, and I like brought it up, and so but the work on that was I had to do wedge cuts, and branches were cracking. So next year I thought about, well, maybe I can repot it next year, but I don't think I'm gonna. I think I'm gonna leave it for one more year.
Yeah.
So
heavy work, it's a little chancy.
if you like design them in the spring, late spring, and the work's fine, that's good. Or if you do it maybe, so we're almost into September. If you did it like end of, maybe beginning of July, and then you can kind of watch the tree and see how the work went then you could kind of make a better decision. But the later and later you design a tree into the fall, then it's almost like working the tree and then repotting in the same session, because they're not having a chance to recuperate really from that amount of work. So I guess it would depend. It's a big maybe. So.
All right. Other questions for Todd Schlafer, guys? We have him for the next sort of 10 minutes.
I'm gonna put this back.
Todd's gonna put his tree back while you guys are ruminating. Well, Todd is coming back, guys. There's an interesting article. I read Mike Hagedorn's blog with some regularity. And are you filming me now? Hey, what's up, guys? And Mike has a really interesting blog about needle cast versus overwatering, which is just what Todd was talking about. So Mike Hagedorn has pictures of these pine needles with banding and fruiting bodies and sort of this irregularity indicative of needle casting versus a pine that might be getting too much water, which gives you more of a uniform, really brown tip. So I always plug Mike Hagedorn stuff because he's a really wonderful writer, a thoughtful guy, and knows his stuff. So it's a really interesting article on overwatering versus pine needle cast. So good one to check out. Todd's back.
Is that it? Or are we good?
All right, we got a thank you. All right.
All right.
Any other questions, guys? Going once, going twice. Here from the bunker at First Branch.
Yep.
Here, here.
So go love your Ponderosas, because they're wonderful trees, and then they're native to Colorado. So we're very lucky to have them here. So
They're great trees.
they are.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.